And we welcome you back in with Miranda Kahn and John Bachman here. And of course, we've been talking about Christians around the world, and this new video from ISIS purporting to show the executions, more beheadings of Christians. Well, in other places around the world, Christians are wearing orange, as the victims of these beheadings often do, as a sign of solidarity for the brothers and sisters who have been killed in the name of religion. Yeah, the color is a nod to the jumpsuits ISIS militants have forced their victims to wear. This is ISIS beheaded and shot 30 Ethiopian Christians in Libya over the weekend. Just tragic. And joining us now is terrorism expert Erick Stakelbeck. He's author of the new book, ISIS Exposed, Beheading, Slavery, and the Hellish Reality of Radical Islam. Erick, thanks so much for being with us. We see this moment of solidarity where these Christians are now wearing orange in these protests and demonstrations, but still there's been a lot of concern because this issue might, even though it's on front pages a lot of places, still not getting the national attention or international attention it deserves from leaders around the globe.
No, John, really it isn't. And it's pretty stunning because what ISIS is doing is really reminiscent to what Hitler did during World War II with the Jewish people. They are openly genocidal. The jihadists of ISIS are massacring Christians in the cradle of Christianity, the birthplace of the faith, whether it's beheadings, burnings, enslaving women and children, using Christian women as sex slaves. And John, they're very open about it. ISIS is declaring that they want to liquidate every last Christian from the Middle East and North Africa, and unfortunately, they're having pretty good success right now doing just that, and Western leaders are not stepping up, speaking out, or taking action in a forceful way as this goes on.
What do you think they need to be doing specifically, Erick?
I think, number one, put pressure on Muslim nations in the Middle East in terms of how they treat Christian minorities. That's number one. Make it clear to the Muslim world that we here in the West care about how they treat their Christian minorities, in particular Christian minorities, but any religious minorities. Number two, militarily. Look, again and again, I talk about this in my book, we know that ISIS is in Iraq and Syria. They're the main ones behind this jihad against Christians. You must crush them militarily in this caliphate that they control right now. It's not brain surgery. You don't need a heavy U.S. footprint. Think back to Afghanistan, 2001, special forces on the ground. We worked with the Northern Alliance. We routed the Taliban. We can do the same thing today in Iraq with the Kurds, with moderate Sunni tribes.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more, Erick, about what you brought up, talking about the Holocaust and the relation to what the Nazis did to the Jews. Humanitarian Johnny Moore, author of the book Defying ISIS, writing in a column saying, quote, "The fact is we deal with the crisis here, or we deal with it, or we deal with the crisis there, or we deal with it here." Do you think a Holocaust is the appropriate terminology to be using what we're talking about today? And I would take one issue with a slight difference here. The difference is this stuff is being put on the internet for the entire world to see. It wasn't until the very end, I think, until news cameras really got in there and told the story of what was taking place in the concentration camps. But we see this stuff every day, still little action from leaders around the globe.
Yeah, good point, John. Although Hitler did lay this out in Mein Kampf a few years ago, a few years before he unfortunately enacted his insane policies. But as you said, the fact that it's in our face, and ISIS is very bold and very proud about it, projecting it around the world to their followers, getting great propaganda value from this open slaughter of Christians. So President Obama in particular really doesn't have an excuse here. From what I've seen from President Obama, he goes out of his way, number one, to attack Israel, the Jewish state, goes out of his way to attack Christians. In his past few appearances here in D.C. at some events in Washington, talked about comparing ISIS to the Crusades and less than loving Christians, etc. Johnny's doing all this while Christians are being massacred in the Muslim world by radical Muslims, but he doesn't seem too eager to talk about that. It's disappointing. And by the way, we've had case after case over the past few weeks in particular of American citizens traveling overseas to Syria and Iraq to join ISIS. And John, if we're not careful, one day they could return home. So the ISIS problem is not just over there, it's at our very doorstep.
Right, Erick. Yeah. Speaking of that, reports now are coming out that ISIS is operating in Mexico, just 8 miles from the U.S. border. The Washington Times writes this. Judicial Watch sources said that coyotes working for the notorious Juarez cartel are smuggling in Islamic State terrorists across the U.S. border between New Mexico cities, as well as through the porous border between Ocala and Fort Hancock, Texas. What are you hearing?
Well, I can't verify those reports directly right now, but what I can tell you is that jihadist groups, terrorists, are absolutely not only trying to breach the U.S. border, it's obviously so porous and so attractive, but number two, terrorists in the past have come across that border, in particular Hezbollah. So the report you referenced, I've seen it. I'm actually in the process of verifying it myself. But one of the most chilling passages in my book, ISIS Exposed, actually concerned the border. A former CIA clandestine services officer who's worked in hotspots around the world for 30 years told me, Eric, the thing that keeps me up at night is the possibility that an ISIS jihadist could penetrate that porous southern border with a chemical or biological weapon and set it off in an American city. Look, it's been 13 and a half years since 9/11, yet our borders remain wide open. You cannot sustain yourself as a nation state long term if you refuse to secure your borders. It's suicide.
Well, Eric, I want to ask you, because we're hearing reports today, there were 6 arrests here in this country, 4 in Minnesota, 2 in California. These guys apparently had plans to go over and join Syria. We're hearing more and more of these reports and seeing these folks showing up in federal courtrooms. Are you encouraged by the amount of arrests that are being made, or are you frightened or concerned because we hear about the arrests? Obviously, probably more folks are slipping through the cracks.
Yeah. John, great point. It's a combination for me of, hey, relief. Look, our law enforcement and intelligence, they're doing great work. We've had a bit of luck as well, but there's concern because it continues. We see case after case now of U.S. citizens wanting to leave their comfortable lives here in America, travel overseas to join this ISIS caliphate, or, John, they're staying put and plotting to carry out attacks right here in the U.S. ISIS has released audio tapes, videotapes saying, hey, it's great if you come here to the Middle East, but you know what? You can stay in your own backyard and carry out attacks there. You don't have to come here. Stay in the United States. And John, really, at the end of the day, ISIS's goal, their strategy, is to turn American and European cities into guerrilla war zones, where you're having a Boston bombing, a Paris, a Ottawa, a Fort Hood-style attack on a regular basis in U.S. cities. And just in February, just 2 months ago, John, the FBI director, James Comey, said that we now have an ISIS presence in all 50 U.S. states. So they're trying to put the foot soldiers in line to make that strategy a reality.
Eric, what do you think the appeal is to ISIS?
Well, I think, number one, success breeds attraction. ISIS controls some 35,000 square miles of territory in the heart of the Middle East. That's an area the size of Great Britain. So that's number one, success. Number two, they've declared a caliphate. This has been the great dream of jihadists for close to a century. Number three, and perhaps most importantly, is ISIS are masters of social media and propaganda. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. ISIS sends out 90 tweets per minute. They spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on slickly produced propaganda videos, and their propaganda and social media arms are controlled by Westerners, people who were raised here, who know how to connect directly to an English-speaking audience.
And speaking of that,
great
Eric,
success doing it.
Also concerning now, we're hearing some reports too that the narrator's voice in that recently released video showing the execution of those Christians, these Egyptian Christians, has a North American accent on, just highlighting what Eric was talking about. But we thank him very much for his time and joining us here. Get a copy of his book, ISIS Exposed: Beheading, Slavery, and the Hellish Reality of Radical Islam. Erick Stakelbeck, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, John.
And when we come back, Newsmax's Nick Tate gives us our Health Minute, and there isn't a copay, so relax.
No copay, it's free. And take a look at this. Which iconic singer made a surprise appearance at National Record Store Day?